During the school year, a highlight of my week is Wednesday afternoon when I walk a couple blocks to the elementary school and return to the church with a pack of kids. After a wonderful snack, they rotate in groups through 3 activities: singing, creative movement, and crafts. Sounds like fun, huh? I tell you, the only thing better than being one of those kids is being one of their teachers and seeing their joy. But before you think it's all fun and games, I do have to remind you they are kids. People in progress, I like to think of them, which is of course what we all are, but you know, they've had less practice. So now and then things go a little off. Well, on this one particular day, there was this kid, a 7-year-old boy, if you must know, and something was going on. In singing, he jumped off the steps. In dance, he hid behind the sofa. In craft, he waved scissors around. The things we do not do, he did them all. And because I am sort of the lead monkey in the circus, it fell upon me to have a talk with the parent who came to pick him up, who was, of course, embarrassed to hear what her child had been up to, and she insisted that he apologize to me. "Sorry," he muttered, looking at the ground. "Sorry for what?" his mother prompted him. "I'm sorry I was bad," he said miserably. And even though this kid had been on every one of my nerves for the last 2 hours, my heart broke to hear that. He thought he was bad. "Honey, you're not bad," I told him, looking into his teary eyes. "You are good. Now, your behavior today was not exactly good, but you yourself, you are good." Only 7 years old, and already he was internalizing the message that he was bad, and that his worst behavior was proof of his badness. And he can get a lot of validation for this idea. It is out there, the idea that human nature is essentially depraved, or a slightly more optimistic view, that some people are born pretty good, but others not so much. Philosophers have debated this for centuries, whether as a species or as individuals, are people inherently good or inherently bad? I won't go into the various schools of philosophy or the nuances of each argument, but I would like to share the understanding of our faith tradition as presented in the first creation poem from Genesis, the very first chapter of the very first book in your Bible. It is a poem of soaring beauty, splendid imagery, God's sacred breath sweeping over the waters of chaos, speaking light into the darkness, shaping a planet with distinct features of water, land, and sky, causing plant life to grow with cycles of day and night to support the growth, and filling this beautiful, abundant place with all kinds of life. Living things to fill the waters, the skies, the land, all kinds of creatures, each adapted to the place they would live. And for each aspect of the created order, God saw how good it was. Of course, we like the next part of the story best, because that's where we come in. Like kids asking their parents to tell them about the day they were born, we too delight in hearing the part about human beings being added to the mix, created in the very likeness of God, in the divine image of God we were created. How supremely good it all was and still is, my friends. God made us good. Of course, you do not need an ancient poem to tell you that. All you have to do really is hold a baby just once, and you know. I'm willing to bet that you have never ever held a baby and thought, "Oh my, what a monster this one's going to grow up to become." No, instead we look at this little bundle of human perfection, we breathe in that scent that can only be described as sacred, and breathing in the sacred breath of God, we are overcome by the sheer goodness of it all. Life is good, everything is good, we are good. Once upon a time, someone held you and was overwhelmed by your goodness. They held you so close and felt the tiny puffs of your breath on their skin, each breath recalling the sacred breath of God, whispering, "It is good. It is supremely good." It's essential for us to continue seeing ourselves this way. We are good. We were created for goodness sake. Sure, we've made our share of mischief, like my young friend who waved scissors at the craft table. We have made some erroneous judgments, perhaps even inflicted harm, but we are not defined by the worst thing we have ever done, no matter how bad it might be. As creations of God, we are defined by God, who has already defined us. God has called us good, and good we are. I invite you to close your eyes, breathe in God's own sacred breath, and tell yourself, "I am good." Yes, you are. You were made for goodness. And if you are not profoundly convinced of this, please repeat that on a daily basis, hourly if you must, until you start to believe it. Because it is mission critical that we believe in our own goodness if we are to live into our calling as ambassadors of God's goodness in the world. Because that's the other part of the story. It doesn't end with human beings being created in the divine image image of God and called supremely good, left to wander around the earth with smug grins on their faces, enamored by their own beauty. We were not created for narcissism. Instead, we were created for service to the world, the rest of the world that God had just as lovingly created and called good. Now, there is some confusion about this, in part because of this very creation poem, specifically this part where God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." That's Genesis 1, verse 28. Now, the idea of subduing the earth and having dominion over it has been taken by some to mean take what we want, it is all ours, because we're so good. And with great gusto, we have complied, subduing everything that got in our way of exerting our God-given dominion, including at times over other human beings. But to read that text responsibly, we must seek out the true meanings of the words before they were translated into English. Meaning, unless we are scholars of the Hebrew language, we must seek counsel from people who are. According to Old Testament professor Terence Fretheim, the verb subdue has reference to the earth and its cultivation. It's about farming. Humankind was given the task of bringing forth even more life from the earth, engaging in the creative process that God had started. But there must be limits, for even the right to grow things from the soil did not give humans the right to exploit the earth that God had called good. Fretheim says that the command to have dominion, in which God delegates responsibility and a power-sharing relationship with humans, must be understood in terms of caregiving, not exploitation. How fitting that humans created in the likeness of God were assigned such a huge responsibility in the care of God's creation. And that is what dominion is, a responsibility to care for the earth upon which our life and livelihood depend. As it turns out, we human beings were not only created good, we were created for goodness. God, so deeply in love with the world, made us a little bit special so we could help all the other things thrive and flourish. And this is where we start to squirm a bit, because we haven't done such a great job, have we? This is where I could give some really awful statistics about the great harm we have done, how human behavior has pretty much guaranteed the extinction of about 1 million species within our lifetime. Tell you the rate at which our soil is being depleted by industrial farming and how meager is the projected yield of the future if we continue down that path. And I do not need to tell you that these horror stories are all overshadowed by the not so imaginary threat of nuclear devastation if even one of the world's powers were to employ the weapons at their disposal. Given all this, it's tempting to hang our heads in shame and say, "God, we are sorry that we are bad." But not only is that unhelpful, it's untrue. I did not bring up any of those things to contradict the main point, which is our inherent goodness. God made no mistake in calling us good or in creating us with remarkable brains, deep empathy, and language. We've been given gifts unique to our species as far as we know, for a reason. There is no problem, even of our own creation, that we cannot solve. Even today, this very minute, someone somewhere is working out a new idea that will help fulfill God's dream of saving this world, for ultimately, that is God's dream, to see all of creation thriving and flourishing, everyone and everything enjoying abundant life in harmony with all other life. That was the message Jesus brought. And while the circumstances of his time and place led him to focus on issues of social and economic justice, his hope that all should have life and have it abundantly does naturally extend to all of creation, for there is no such thing as abundant life for humanity in isolation from abundant life from the rest of the created order. Even if we wanted to set aside that first creation story of Genesis as just a nice little piece of poetry, we can't. Not if we follow the way of Jesus, the way of caring for the world God so loves. So our task is this: we must all accept our God-given role as caregivers of creation. We all have a role to play, responsibility to help others see their roles as well. As Christians, we talk a lot about Jesus' commandment to share his message with the world. This is part of the message. We cannot love God or neighbor if we are not actively participating in the work of redeeming the world, saving all life, including human life, from peril. That means making our homes, businesses, even churches carbon neutral. It means rethinking what we buy and where it comes from, especially our food, because what we eat is perhaps the biggest impact on how we are caring for our planet. It means paying attention to the people and policies for whom we vote, especially those of us who occupy a large landmass with great global influence. All of this is possible and entirely consistent with our essential nature, because no matter what we might have done in the past, individually or collectively. God made us good. Touch the earth lightly, use the earth gently, nourish the life of the world in our care. Gift of great wonder, ours to surrender, trust for the children tomorrow will bear. Let there be greening, birth from the burning, water that blesses and air that is sweet, health in God's garden, hope in God's children, regeneration that peace will complete. God of all living, God of all loving, God of the seedling, the snow and the sun, teach us, deflect us, Christ reconnect us, using us gently and making us one. There's one message to repeat to yourself this week. Let it be this: God created you good for goodness.